Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome SaltStack Chief Technical Officer and Co-Founder, Tom Hatch.
I want to tell you a story. A few years ago, I'm sitting down, I'm eating breakfast with a good friend who manages himself some infrastructure. And he says to me, Tom, my resignation letter is inside my desk at work. And I think, sorry? And I also think I'm glad he doesn't work for me all of a sudden. But I say, so why is your resignation letter inside your desk? And he says, we're going to get hacked. And that's my defense. I'm sitting there eating breakfast with him, and I'm just amazed, thinking, how is this the conclusion? And as I talk to him, it becomes clear that he just doesn't have the resources to secure his system. He's struggling with just keeping the thing up, let alone defending it. So much of that big picture becomes a slave to the actual needs of the day-to-day operations. By the way, the site he managed held all your mortgage information. Now, when it comes to securing infrastructure, I think it's no secret that we're in a bad place. And when I say we, I don't just mean us in this room who are managing infrastructure. I mean us in a very open and collective sense. What we're doing is pushing applications as quickly as we can without actually considering, again, the big picture and the consequences. But we're also pushing them into environments that are increasingly difficult not only to manage, but also to secure. And so I want to ask the question, how do we get from a bad place to a good place? Something that I found really fascinating in doing my darndest to run SaltStack is that a lot of people like to come to me and explain where they think we should be and say, won't it be great if we could be at this destination? And I sit down with them and listen to them go through this beautiful monologue about their vision of the future. And then I ask, that sounds lovely. What do we do today to start getting there? What does it actually take to go from here to there? Instead of just looking and saying, wow, it's so pretty in my imagined world. And so I want to talk about some of the steps that I like to take when trying to consider what it's going to take to be able to get to that destination. And so the first thing that I want to do is talk about some of the reasons why we exist in a place that isn't the beautiful green hill in the distance. And so I'm going to start with that in the context of security. One of the fundamental problems that I see in securing infrastructure is this rather silly graph. The demands that are placed on us to manage an infrastructure, deploy applications, and innovate significantly outpaces our ability to secure said infrastructure and assets. It's apparent just based on what we talk about when we come together anyway. It's all about how do I deploy, deploy, deploy. I've got to get new apps out there, and I've got to get new code presented to my customers and my users, and I've got to keep my systems running. And securing that infrastructure becomes an afterthought. And the gap that we deal with between the activities and the automation and the processes that we push forward at this incredible pace to be able to deploy and manage, that gap outruns what we're able to do from a security automation perspective. The next problem that I want to talk about is communication. One of the core premises of DevOps, if we go all the way back to the beginning of the DevOps movement, is about communication. One day, years ago, I was sitting on a panel. And on this panel, somebody else makes the comment, well, wouldn't life just be better if our front-end developers and our infrastructure engineers would just get along? And then this comment received thunderous applause. One of my regrets of that panel is that I didn't immediately stand up afterwards and just say, how's that working for everybody? One of the core ideas of the DevOps movement was that if we could create a shared language and a shared interface between front-end developers and infrastructure engineers, then we could facilitate that communication with tools. One of the things that I found very ironic is that it's felt over the years like instead of facilitating communication, we just make tools as part of our fight. To say, no, I'm going to make tools that benefit the IT team, I'm going to make tools that benefit the developers, and then this pendulum kind of swings back and forth. So the next thing that I want to talk about is the scarcity of resources. I think that it's very abundant to us, especially in this room, that resources are scarce. I'm in a room with brilliant people, engineers, people who can see how to solve complex problems. But we never have the time and the people to pull it off, do we? And we always want more time, and we always want more people, but the world around us is running so darn fast, it's hard to keep up anyway. And so, with that premise, I want to start presenting that question. If the gap is widening in our ability to secure infrastructure, and if communication between front-end developers, IT professionals, whether you call yourselves DevOps or SRE or whatever your flavor of the month is, and your security team, this is generally not a really healthy communicative environment. And then we combine that with the scarcity of resources and we can say, what could we do to get out of that bad situation? Now, you might be thinking that my next slide is going to be about how to get out of the bad situation, but that would be moving too quickly. Once we get an idea as to the cards on the table that say, here's some of the fundamental problems we have to deal with, and yes, there are more, but I've only got 20 minutes up here. The next thing to do isn't to immediately rush into solving the problem, but it's to say, what are the assets that I have to approach this problem? And also to say, do I have any other examples historically that I can follow so that I can build a good model for solving this problem? It's only far too easy for us to rush head first into the situations that we're trying to solve. And so I'm going to start by asking, what business do I have in security? There's a lot of very respectable engineers in the room, so I'll have to clarify. This is Michael Jordan in a baseball suit, baseball uniform. In case you didn't recognize him. SaltStack has been used to secure infrastructure since its inception. This has been an important premise behind the automation systems that we have built from the beginning. When we come back and we look at the use cases of Salt, well, let me tell you another story. Years ago at a large company, and we're talking, this is like 2012, very, very early. There was a major security flaw in a piece of software that was being used by this large company that at the time had about 50,000 servers under management. The IT team, the infrastructure team came together. They weren't called an SRE team yet in that particular company. They are now. But they came together and they were having a meeting about how they were going to update and mitigate this security issue across their environment. The general consensus in the meeting was evolving into, yeah, this is a process that's going to take us between about 3 to 8 weeks of work to mitigate this security issue. And then in the back of the room, one guy raises his hand and says, "Can I get back to work?" And everyone looks at him and says, "Well, we're having a meeting here. Come on, what are you talking about?" And he says, "I fixed it already." This individual had covertly deployed Salt across a very large infrastructure and subsequently in the course of the meeting had written some states that would not only update the vulnerable software, but also fully test and verify that it was properly deployed. He then came to me and told me this story, and he said, yeah, it only took about 4.5 minutes for Salt to do the work. And I responded and said, well, what took so darn long? And he, of course, replied and said, yeah, well, we did all the verification stuff, too. I've personally worked in secure environments. I've personally worked for the US intelligence community. We have numerous people on staff who have extensive experience in security. And I want to reemphasize that Salt has been used to secure systems for a very long time. But we're getting to the point where we want to take those nuts and bolts of security and turn that into something which is more consumable and more repeatable. And that goes on to the next thing that I want to explore. And that is, do I have a historic example or model that I can follow? Now, I know what you're all thinking. You're all thinking, Tom, you idiot. That's not Einstein. So I've got E equals MC squared up here. Who here has heard E equals MC squared before today? I'm trying to see if there's anybody without their hand up so I can point them out and make fun of them. This person is a guy by the name of Michael Faraday. Michael Faraday is kind of one of my heroes. He lived long before Einstein, and he grew up with a speech impediment and had a hard time in school early on, and we're talking about the early 1800s, so, you know, get what you expect from school. He learned how to read, but then stopped attending school when he was very young. He later got a job at a bookbinding company. And so he spent his days binding books and spent his nights reading them. It gave him a unique opportunity to be able to teach himself something that many of us in this room are very familiar with. Over time, he had an opportunity to work as an apprentice to a very famous scientist. In that lab, he had the ability and the opportunity to start running experiments. Michael Faraday is the one that figured out that electromagnetism is a field. Michael Faraday is the one who figured out how to harness electricity for physical work and created the electric motor. The list of inventions that this guy has is extremely long. But a few years after this, as we move forward into about the 1860s, most people looked at what he'd done and thought, well, that's all fine and novel, but we don't necessarily have applications for it. But a few others started to work with Faraday and develop the mathematics to express what he had discovered. Michael Faraday's work established very important foundational concepts, but they were broad. They involved numerous different acute pieces of a bigger picture. But if it wasn't for his work, then Einstein would never have been able to come up with what he came up with. Einstein was able to come and give us general relativity and basically put a nice bow on the package. He was able to give us something that was a little more usable. Innovators like Tesla were subsequently able to use his work to create real applications for the electromagnetic theory that Faraday had figured out. And so that becomes one of the questions that I want to explore. SALT has a vast array of automation tools. SALT comes with many individual little inventions that are cobbled together. So if we look at this from an automation perspective, and we're able to say, yes, SALT has had these systems for a long time, this ties into one of the next things that I wanted to do. When I started working on SALT, one of my goals, or one of the motivations for making it open source, was my realization that there is a finite limit as to how much I can come up with. I need to be able to harvest and gather information from a significantly larger group of people to understand more ways to apply the technology and to solve the disparate problems that are out there. This is one of the greatest benefits of open source, is that we can collectively bring all of these things back. And so subsequently, we've watched and learned as many different applications of SALT's automation have been created in the wild. And then carefully looked at these different applications and then brought these applications together and asked, how can we take things that are being done by many people to solve disparate problems and create those more unified, singular features that can drive real change inside of organizations? Or, as I generally like to say, how can we take the many pieces that we have and weaponize it? I'm a big fan of trebuchets. They're quite beautiful. What we're working on delivering in the SecOps is not, with this new SaltStack for SecOps, is not us just trying to make another product window that mimics other people that are out there. What we're trying to do is to say, if we apply the automation principles of SALT, frankly, all of them, to this problem, can we present that problem in such a way that solves that communication issue? can we present this in such a way that we can start driving towards allowing security teams and infrastructure teams to communicate about actually continuously delivering a completely secure infrastructure? What can we do from an automation perspective to mitigate the fact that you don't have the time and you don't have the resources to properly handle these things? And what can we do to close that gap, to take the innovation that we've gained in rolling out, managing, and dealing with the day-to-day operations, but apply that in a simple way for all of us to try and solve the mounting, growing security problem that we're dealing with? And that is what we're striving to deliver. And that is what we're working very hard to try and give everyone in this room as a working solution. Now, I'll leave the trebuchet up. It's gorgeous. But I do want to thank everybody for coming. I started working on Salt back in 2011, and it's been an incredible journey to see a project that, when it was only a few thousand lines of code, to the point now where in the last quarter, I believe we had something like 2.5 million lines of churn over the code base, because we are one of the most active software development communities in the world. I just want to express my gratitude to everyone who is here and to everyone who continues to help us develop Salt, not only as a community, but also as a company. We have been able to make significant changes, not only in the way that we manage infrastructure, but one of the things that brings me a lot of joy is when somebody comes up to me and says, "Tom, I get to spend more time with my family. I get to go home on time more often. And I get to accomplish more at work so that I can push myself forward, not just my company." And so I just want to express a deep gratitude to everyone who has continued to stick with us, who continues to work with us, and everyone who continues to contribute, and to our wonderful customers. Because, I mean, we couldn't have gotten anywhere near where we are today without the massive amounts of contribution and communication and work that's happened in this community. Now, I'm the last one you have to look at on this stage this morning. We've got one more day filled with absolutely fantastic presentations. We've got many presentations from customers, community members, and I urge you to attend as many of them as you possibly can, and to have a wonderful day at SaltConf. I look forward to seeing many of you again next year, and I look forward to seeing many of you and talking to many of you online throughout the year. So once again, thank you for everything that you've done. Thank you for being part of something which is exciting and growing. And thank you for helping us help you together figure out how to solve a lot of these really complex problems. Thanks.